Let me begin. I basically would hope to touch on the foreign exchange crisis and basically the key economic issues we are facing right now and how the budget is responding to those issues and whether they've been aggravating as the theme also suggests, whether the already existing issues are being aggravated or whether it is providing a solution. Let me begin by explaining something on the foreign exchange crisis and how the budget basically approaches this crisis. First of all, I think we have to understand this crisis as a foreign exchange liquidity crisis or a foreign exchange liquidity trap. I will explain that briefly later, but let me start off by how the budget have basically trying to, or the budget is trying to address the foreign exchange issue. So looking at the key budget proposals, what we're seeing here is that the government is trying to raise the key objective of the budget is to raise government revenue up to around 11% of the GDP, which we are having only around 8% of the GDP. So the expectation is that that government is actually trying to collect as much as tax revenue it can through these budget proposals and thereby reducing the fiscal deficit. So the idea behind that and how it connects with the foreign exchange crisis is that now the conventional neoclassical neoliberal idea is that the balance of payments deficit and the balance of payments crisis in any economy is driven by the fiscal deficit. So the private sector, so if we divide the economy into two sectors, the government sector or the public sector and the private sector, the neoclassical view suggests that if an economy is facing balance of payments problems, that is mainly driven or triggered by large fiscal deficits, large deficits in the government sector. So following that view, this budget is trying to reduce the fiscal deficit and trying to stop the transformation of the fiscal deficit or the fiscal deficit transforming into a balance of payments deficit and a balance of payment crisis. Now, let me try to explain the problem of this view. Now, if we look at countries which are currently facing similar chronic balance of payment crisis, for instance, Mexico and Argentina. Now, these countries are experiencing very low fiscal deficits. Now, for example, Argentina defaulted on its foreign debt when its fiscal deficit was around 5%. And Mexico was actually having budget surpluses, right? They were having budget surpluses while they were facing extreme foreign exchange shortages. So that suggests that now initially we were saying that we can divide the economy into public and the private sector. So what they are looking at is where the leakage is taking place. So what their view or the neoclassical neoliberal view is that the leakage is taking place through the fiscal deficit in the public sector. But very much contrary to that view, the experience of these countries and even countries in Asia, but I will stick to countries in the Latin American region, that these countries are facing acute or chronic balance of payment crisis or foreign exchange shortages, while their fiscal deficit is quite low, right? Is quite at a minimum. So what that suggests is that the leakage is not happening so much through we are not saying that there is no leakage through the government sector, but the gravity of the crisis or the extent of the crisis is being triggered by the leakage in the private sector itself. So the neoclassical view completely look away from that the leakage in the private sector. They basically don't focus on that. So then we have to now look at to the idea of capital flight. So now I think we have been discussing this over and over again throughout the past 1.5 years, that there is a massive outflow of capital through the private sector itself, and that itself amounts to, or it is much more larger than our foreign debt also. If we go to analyze or estimate it. Now, if I may quickly touch on some figures. Now, there is a globally reputed think tank, which is basically specializing on illicit capital flows from developing countries. And they put out a report in 2000, last year, December, 2021 December, highlighting the fact that in Sri Lanka, roughly around US dollars 40 billion has been flowing out of the country since 2009 to 2018. So, and we should also highlight the fact that this 40 billion is a gross underestimation, and the report itself clearly highlights that, because this process happens on in 3 different ways. So they have only looked into one particular way, which is over invoicing and under invoicing through the open account system in international trade. So they have only looked into that using UN commercial trade data. There are 2 other ways. The other one way is that the letters of credit system they have not taken into account, because that is not possible through the mechanism they have employed. And the other is the services trade. So they have not looked into the services trade, and also into this misinvoicing through the letters of credit system. They have only looked at the open account system. So within that framework only, they are saying roughly US dollars 40 billion had flown out of the country during this period. So just to give you a perspective about the magnitude and of that particular amount, so we defaulted roughly $51 billion in April this year. So this amount actually accounts for about, so this outflow alone is accounting for about 80% of that debt. And then, so I will not, go into that, because extensively, because we have to focus on the budget. So, and the other point about the capital flight I want to mention is that now Sri Lanka is experiencing trade surpluses for the last 3 to 4 months, right? While we are experiencing trade surpluses, we are at the same time experiencing acute foreign exchange shortages. Now we are seeing a tremendous shortage of essential medicine in the hospitals, and the essential stuff like the stationary stuff that is required in the for education and so on, and food shortage, fertilizer shortage, and this has led to a tremendous increase in inflation, because as we see, as we know, there is a great disparity in income distribution. So whatever the resources that are existing within the economy, there's a great competition to grab that. So those people who are with the purchasing power will buy it at any price which is given at the market. So this is basically pushing inflation of the essential items, or price or rate of increase of the prices of the essential items have shot up 2 or 3 times greater than the rate of depreciation. So we know the rate of depreciation is about 80%, 75 to 80%, but the price increase is far greater. So so now what I need to show is that how the budget is trying to address this issue. So budget is only trying to address this issue by reducing the fiscal deficit and increasing government revenue. So now the problem, as we highlighted, is that this is not addressing the leakage of the foreign exchange that is happening through the private sector. The budget has nothing to say about that. So obviously we are seeing, obviously what we are seeing is that the budget proposals are not addressing the key issues in the economy, especially the foreign exchange crisis. The way they are approaching the problem is completely flawed, because they're based on neoclassical free market ideas. And what we are experiencing right now is a complete market failure in the external sector. So when there's a market failure, that is to say, the capital flows are not responding to the interest rate mechanism and the exchange rate mechanism of the country. So what happens there is that the monetary policy mechanism becomes powerless in influencing capital flows. So just to explain a little bit what that means is that now we have a currency that depreciated 80%, which is far greater than what the IMF suggested, the free market rate of depreciation, what the IMF suggested. IMF suggested around 17%, but this depreciated around five times. But still, we are having a great lack of foreign exchange in the system. Despite the crash in the exchange rate, the capital is not flowing in. I mean, when the exchange rate depreciates, that means that our assets become cheaper. So it becomes advantageous for whoever who is having foreign exchange to get their capital into the country. And also, when you raise the interest rates, that is also an incentive for people with foreign exchange or capital outside the country to bring that capital into the country. So, despite both these instruments, while interest rates have gone up about 3 times from around 10 to 12% to around 30%, while exchange rate has also crashed about 80%. So both these mechanisms have not been able to attract the foreign exchange that is flowing out. Now, for instance, now a couple of days ago, governor of the central bank said the exporters are not converting or repatriating the dollars. So now we were also writing a statement about it. So we just did a short analysis that is leading to an outflow of about $6.8 billion during this year alone. The exporters not converting or not repatriating their export incomes. So now the budget has no answer to these issues. Now 6.8 billion is obviously, as you all know, is a massive amount. $6.8 billion. So despite the crash in the exchange rate, despite the increase in the interest rates about 2 to 3 times, the incomes that are already generated in the economy by hardworking workers are not being able to. I mean that income is not accessible by the workers themselves or the public in general. They're being captured by a business elite who are operating in the import-export sector, who are more inclined to keep their capital outside the country. So now I want to move on to the fact that framing of the workers as unproductive in the budget. So the one issue is that they have highlighted the budget deficit. So now again, we can also say the budget deficit we have experienced, Sri Lanka has experienced budget deficits well over 10% consecutively, especially after 1977. So now, right now, we are having a budget deficit of around 11% to 12%. But now, previously also, we have experienced extremely high budget deficits, but it was not sufficient. It was not a sufficient condition for a crash of this magnitude to come about. So that argument about budget deficit can be also contested within the context of Sri Lanka also. We don't have to go into examples of Argentina and Mexico. So that cutting the budget deficit alone is not a solution. So, and secondly, the budget speech is saying, apart from the fiscal deficit, budget speech is highlighting or trying to frame Sri Lanka's workers, the working class, as unproductive or as lazy, and that this president, the unelected president, is trying to portray the workers as unproductive and that as a major cause for the crisis. Now, this is obviously a scandalous statement. Now, while the private sector has dragged out most of the capital in the form of foreign exchange and driven the economy to its knees, and now they are completely silent about that issue and now trying to portray the workers or frame the workers as unproductive. So let me also say whether how productive the private sector is, the private sector business elite. Now, apart from taking out the capital that they would want to shift out of the economy, the capital that is remaining within the economy, how are they using the capital? What is remaining in the economy? Okay, mainly what we are seeing is that they have dumped that capital mainly in the form of unproductive assets. Now, in economic theory, in any economic theory, in any school of thought, what it says is that for an economy to grow and expand, you need domestic savings. You need to increase the volume of domestic savings. Then only you can transform that into productive investments, and which would result in greater employment and output. But now, we are having one of the lowest savings rate for a private sector, right? It does not mean that the private sector or the business elite is not having savings. Their savings are in the form of apartments, absolutely luxurious vehicles or luxurious villas and houses and so on. So now, what is the character of those assets? Are they productive? Can we use those assets productively in the economy? Now, these are, of course, what we can say is that foreign exchange consuming type of assets. They're not foreign exchange generating, and they are parking their surplus money, the surplus money, that is what they are basically retaining within the economy in these areas. So apartments, vehicles. Now, what is the character of these assets? The character of these assets is that despite now for them it's a saving, it's an investment, and it's a consumption altogether happening through these assets. Now, for instance, if you take an apartment, an owner can basically use it for his personal consumption. He uses that as a way of retaining the value of his capital, and also appreciating that the value of that capital, because as time goes on, the value of those assets appreciate, and also as an investment where they can rent out and earn an income out of it. So this particular asset class cuts across all these categories: consumption, investment, and savings. So we cannot restrict it into particularly, okay, this is a form of savings or a form of consumption or a form of investments. It goes across all these three areas. So now, but it's not. Is it addressing the key issues in the economy? Obviously, we are having a tremendous shortage in essentials, capital goods, and also essential requirements like food, stationery, fertilizer, machinery for the agriculture sector, and so on. The essential output which any economy would need to prosper. But the assets in the private sector that are remaining within the country also are not invested in these sectors. They are being parked unproductively. So, but the budget is trying to portray workers as unproductive. What we need to question is the business elite unproductive? What have they done with the capital, with the money they have, with the savings they have? So we need a plan to transform these unproductive assets into a form of tradable savings, where we can retransfer those that capital or foreign exchange into productive sector. So I won't go into that now, how we can do that, but just wanted to highlight how the budget is trying to portray this problem, because they are trying to show that it is the workers who are unproductive, not the private sector business elite. So moving on from that, so after framing workers as unproductive, and after framing government budget deficit is the key issue of those are the two key issues that led to this crisis. It has launched a wave of privatization through the budget. So this is how the budget is trying to justify privatization, showing that the problem is in the government sector, that there is a large fiscal deficit and the government sector is unproductive, therefore, and also the workers are also unproductive. So now the solution is to bridge the budget deficit by starting a wave of privatization, even of profit-making state institutions. So as we discussed earlier, we can see, contrary to that mainstream view, actually it's the business elite. it must be productive for them individually to park these assets like this, in this way. But if we take the collective requirement of the economy, collective requirement of the society, they are highly unproductive. So, so now that is what we need to focus on. So by trying to portray the government sector as unproductive, they are implying or implying without explicitly stating that they are implying private sector is productive. That's why they are trying to privatize. So they are saying basically government is unproductive, private sector is the productive sector. But like what we discussed, we have to question that idea whether the private sector is actually productive, or whether or whether they are the ones who have actually led the entire economy into this point, beyond this point of no return in terms of the economic crisis. So we have to reframe or reframe the how people look at the crisis. Basically, it's been shown as a crisis that has been triggered due to failures in the government. So, and also at the same time, so we have to vehemently or explicitly campaign against privatization. And I suppose portraying of the economic problem or economic issue in this particular way would assist that movement. And moving on, then the second great or the most pressing issue which we are facing now in terms of the economy is unbearable inflation. So now whether these budget proposals are, and of course the food crisis, the unavailability or lack of access to affordable food. So now whether what is the budget's approach to inflation, the problem of inflation, hyperinflation in the economy. So now we have to move into the particular tax policies or the general tax policy which the budget has been trying to, or the budget proposals are basically centered on. So now before the budget, before say about a month's time, the government proposed that we should increase the direct taxation. So they have launched a wave of taxation on the sort of the higher income earners in the working class, and from there towards the upper classes, the professional class, the managerial class, and then to the corporate sector profits also. So there are two components in this tax policy. One is that they are targeting income taxes, or this is how the government wanted to portray this. One is that they're targeting the income taxes on the professionals, higher income earners, and the managerial class. And on the other hand, they are targeting corporate taxes or raising export taxes profits to about 30%. So with that, what they are saying is that what they are trying to portray the entire budget as a progressive one, because it is not inflationary. It is targeting the income or higher income earners, or it is not leading to an increase in the prices, right? So that is how they were portraying this. So what that means is that the direct tax income is projected to increase greater than the indirect tax income. So when you raise it, what the flip side of that is that if you raise indirect taxes, that means that you are also putting the burden of the budget mostly on the common people. That is, it is inflationary. They will tax, the essentials like rice, dry fish, and all that. Basically, the goods and services taxes. So when you increase that, obviously there will be an increase in the prices. But the budget tried to portray this its approach as a progressive one by saying, okay, we are targeting the income, so it is not inflationary. This cost should be borne out by the higher income earners. So now let me reflect on that. Now that was the initial proposal, and also we have to take into account the corporate tax on the especially the exporters. So exporters, especially the BUI companies, have been enjoying tax holidays up to indefinite tax holidays, and they are not paying taxes on their raw material imports, and also they are enjoying a very low income tax of around 14%. And the BOI firms are not paying, most of them are enjoying tax holidays. So what we also need to highlight is that this particular issue of not taxing the export sector is also a main contributor to the drop in government revenue as a share of the GDP. So it has fallen from about, if I am not wrong, from about 16% to now it's about 8%. It was, I think it was even higher than 16% by about 1990. So the BOI company started expanding after that period within the framework of massive tax holidays and tax cuts. So what happens is that now these BOI firms accounts for over 70% of the export income. So now imagine 70% of the export income not being taxed, not being touched. And those incomes have been growing ever since 1990. So what happens there is that there is a particular sector in the economy significantly important and significantly large compared to the rest of the economy that is not being taxed at all. So when you are not taxing that sector, a sector that is growing, that means that the GDP is expanding while the demand for government services are also rising. For instance, like transport, highways, and so on, medical, education, and so on would rise with the rise in incomes. But the necessary tax income is not being generated because of the sector not being touched at all. So that has also contributed to the yawning fiscal deficit in the government's fiscal deficit. So this sector not being touched. So initially, just before the budget, government was suggesting, okay, now we are going to do away with all these tax holidays. We are going to tax the export sector evenly 30% on its profits. But in the budget, that proposal was completely scrapped. So still the BOI companies are enjoying the tax holiday. They are not being touched. So now what happened was, but the professional class is now being properly taxed now, and who are earning, earning through their salaries, and also the managerial class. So now they are being taxed, but not the export sector. So as a result, and also, I would also want to highlight, now we were focusing on the indirect taxes, goods and services taxes. Now, looking at this budget, they are trying to, the estimation or their projection is that our direct taxes will be increased by around 60%. And surprisingly, our indirect taxes or the indirect tax income is projected to increase by even, you can hear me, yeah, is projected to increase by an even greater rate of 80%. So while they portray frame the budget as a very progressive one where it is non-inflationary, compared to the direct to indirect tax ratio of 2022 that is 30.3%, the projected direct to indirect tax ratio will go down to 29%. Although it seems like a small drop, it has a massive inflationary impact on the economy. That is because the indirect taxes are expected to grow far greater than the direct tax income. Is expected to grow far greater than the direct tax income. So what happens there is that again they are trying to reap the tax income through burdening the general public and in an inflationary way. So going back to the second problem, that is the hyperinflation in the economy. So this budget is basically again aggravating the problem of inflation. So not trying to reduce it. So when these budget proposals come into effect, we can see another wave of inflation. So what that means is that when our inflation goes up, that means our currency uh, would need to depreciate. If the central bank allows the currency to depreciate, because if the currency does not depreciate, we have a basic economic theory that is called the real exchange rate theory. So what happens there is that if our inflation is higher than our trading partners and our currency does not depreciate by that amount, then our exchange rate tends to appreciate in real terms. So when a currency appreciates in real terms, what happens is that the imports become cheaper and exports become uncompetitive. So then there is a tendency for us to go into even more acute balance of payment problem. So if in this context, if the central bank allows the currency to depreciate when these proposals come into effect, triggering higher inflation, that would mean there will be a second round of inflation, a ripple effect, and inflation will be even more greater. And the other option for the central bank is to, if they don't want to let the currency to depreciate even more, then they will have to raise the interest rates. Now, this is the basic free market mechanism. I'm not saying, I mean, a progressive state policy would have to resort to these measures, but this is the mechanism in which they are working in. So then, if not, they will have to raise the interest rates even more. Right now, it's over 30%. So the problem of this is that if you raise interest rates as a result of these budget policies, the problem of employment or unemployment will now, okay, now let's say, imagine central bank did not allow the currency depreciation, then they will have to increase the interest rates according to this particular framework. So if you increase the interest rate, then the issue of unemployment will be again aggravated. Now with inflation, we have what we call stagflation, that is high unemployment and high inflation both together. So this budget is basically, when these proposals come into effect, both these issues will be aggravated. Either it will aggravate inflation, or if not, it will aggravate the problem of unemployment. So what they are hoping to do here is that they are only focusing on, like, what the traditional way of looking at the economy through IMF lens is that they are only focusing on the external sector. Now, when you are looking at an economic equilibrium in the economy, there are few sectors, not just the external sector. There is the labor market, there is the foreign exchange market, or the external sector, balance of payments, and also the that is reflected through the balance in investments and savings, and also the goods and services sector that is reflected through inflation. Now, what they are focused on is only balancing the investments and savings problem or the balance of payments problem. So when you just focus on those things, and through these mechanisms of interest rate and exchange rate and the cutting down the budget deficit, when you do that, you are pushing other sectors of the economy into chronic disequilibrium, because you are only working within the framework of market instruments. So when you raise interest rates, what would happen is there will be a chronic disequilibrium in the labor market, or what Keynes would call, if you just stick to those methods, there will be it would mean that the average incomes of the public will fall below subsistence level. So there is no equilibrium there. So you are pushing a great section or great proportion of the population beyond the point of subsistence. So I mean, as we see, UN reports or World Food Program reports are highlighting unimaginable rates of malnutrition and lack of access to food. They are highlighting the fact that about 86% of the families in Sri Lanka is now struggling to get the adequate amount of their food requirements. So these are the repercussions, and this problem will be aggravating through these budget proposals, not the other way around. So, and then I want to highlight the fact that wasteful spending in the budget itself. Of course, we know now they have allocated 530 billion rupees to maintaining the army this year. Now, if we look into how we are trying, and also 1.2 trillion rupees in public investments. I will first quickly touch on the expenditure into defense, and then go on to these so-called public investments. So now, comparing that with how they are trying to meet the fiscal deficit. Now we have to meet the fiscal deficit by borrowing. So government is projecting around 2.4 trillion rupees as the fiscal deficit for next year. And out of that 2.4 trillion, around 600 billion they are trying to secure through foreign borrowings, or around 550 billion. So this and that is exactly equal or roughly equal to the amount that they are trying to spend for defense or the defense ministry. So the amount of foreign indebtedness, the amount of increase in foreign indebtedness projected during the next year is equal to the defense budget. So I mean, we can see how wastefully they are trying to utilize the resources that they are trying to get out of taxes and also by borrowing. And secondly, 1.2 trillion worth of public investments. Now, public investments are mostly are going into all these what we call wasteful public sector spending. These roads and highways and all that type of thing, where the provincial level corruption is happening. So we are seeing an increase of that type of spending from about 1 trillion last year to 1.2 trillion. There's about 20% increase in that type of spending. Even while the economy is collapsing and is crashing, they are still planning 1.2 trillion in wasteful spending. So what? Now we were actually touching on the food crisis. So, but alternatively, what they could have done is cut down all that wasteful spending, and like for instance, what Dr. Ahilan Kadragama in a recent discussion suggested, that he suggested that we should reintroduce the rice subsidy, and so to reintroduce the rice subsidy, they should be having funds, and we should be showing, okay, how are the funds are going to come. So, I mean, by cutting down all these wasteful expenditure, which is actually going into the pockets of a corrupt business elite and also a corrupt political class, these that can be sort of transferred as transfer payments to finance this type of projects, where it will ensure that people are not starving or people are not finding it difficult to fulfill their food requirements. So cutting down these type of wasteful expenditure is one way. So, but continuing from the Rajapaksa era, this particular budget is also spending more and more on those type of wasteful projects. So that I want to highlight. Yes, from there I would like to stop and would like to open it to discussion.